My daughter-in-law had an accident and fell into a coma. During one of my visits to the hospital, my grandson approached me and whispered, "Grandma, Mom isn't sick. She's faking." Confused, I replied, "What? Don't say that." Then he handed me his phone, and I froze. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. Stay with this story until the very last moment. The ending will astonish you. After you've seen it, let me know what you'd do in my place. I pulled the old motorcycle out from in front of the bakery, my hands still smelling of flour and yeast. This morning was busier than usual. Customers were coming in and out non-stop. Every day that passed, I felt a small joy seeing the hot loaves arranged on the shelves, hearing the laughter and conversations of the people. But what I wanted most right then was to get to the school. For I'd Ethan, my dear grandson. The boy was always excited, recounting what happened in class, his eyes shining as if he wanted to show me the entire world. Just thinking about his smile, all my fatigue disappeared. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I had just put on my helmet, ready to start the engine, when the phone in my pocket vibrated sharply. An unknown number. I frowned, hesitated for a second, but ended up holding it to my ear. The voice on the other end was rushed, cold as a knife that sliced through my thoughts. "Is this Mrs. Johnson? Your daughter-in-law has just suffered a serious traffic accident. We are rushing her to City Central Hospital." I felt a buzzing in my ears, as if the entire world had abruptly shut off. The motorcycle wobbled under my hands, nearly falling to the ground. I stood motionless, clinging to the handlebars, with the sensation that the blood had stopped flowing in my body. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out all the surrounding noises. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, whom I always loved like a daughter, in a serious accident. Those words echoed repeatedly in my head, but I couldn't grasp their true weight. I only knew that at that moment I had to go, see her, and find out what was happening. I quickly dialed David's number, my son, but only heard the ringing tones without an answer. He must be at the hospital already, I told myself, trying to remain calm. But inside me, fear burned like fire, consuming any attempt to think clearly. I wanted to rush out to the hospital, but then I suddenly remembered Ethan. The boy was still at school, waiting for me to pick him up. I couldn't leave him alone. I couldn't let him find out from others. I had to be strong for Ethan, for David, for the whole family. With a heart on fire, I sped towards the school. The streets of Hush, Chicago seemed more congested than ever. Every car, every horn blast was a wall holding me back. Every passing second was like a stab. I wondered, how is Sarah? Is she in pain? Is she conscious? Images of a brutal accident flashed in my mind, and I had to forcibly push them away. I could only pray, murmuring the prayers my mother had taught me as a child, begging for a miracle. Arriving at the school gate, I saw Ethan waiting, hugging his superhero backpack. His face lit up when he saw me, his eyes sparkling as if he was about to tell me something funny. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't let him finish. With a voice hoarse and trembling, I said, "Ethan, get on the bike, now. Your mom had an accident. We have to go to the hospital." I watched his smile vanish instantly, like a light being extinguished. He didn't ask anything, he just climbed on in silence, his small hands gripping my waist tightly the whole way. He didn't say a word, but I felt his fear in the pressure of that embrace. I wanted to turn around, hug him, tell him everything would be all right, but I didn't even dare to believe it myself. I truly wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. City Central Hospital appeared before my eyes, cold and suffocating. The white building, the strong smell of disinfectant that invaded my nose, made me feel short of breath. I led Ethan by the hand through the long corridors. My steps were hurried, but heavy. Arriving at the emergency room, I saw David standing there, dazed like a ghost. His hair was messy, his immaculate white shirt was now wrinkled, the sleeves stained with dark blood. I knew it was Sarah's blood from when he carried his wife to bring her here. Seeing my son like that tore at my soul. David, my strong son, now looked like a lost child. Seeing me, David ran toward me. He buried his head in my shoulder, sobbing as never before. "Mom, Sarah, the doctor said the situation is very serious." His voice cracked and trembled, as if all his strength had vanished. I hugged him, trying to stay firm, but I was trembling too. Ethan, seeing his father cry, also burst into tears. His childlike and disoriented voice cried, "Mommy!" The boy clung tightly to David's pants, his large eyes full of fear, as if afraid of being abandoned. In the midst of this storm, I knelt down, pulled him to my chest, trying to protect him. But how could I protect him when I myself was drowning in fear? The three of us sat on the cold plastic chairs in the hallway. Time seemed to have stopped. The strong smell of disinfectant, the dry voice of the loudspeakers sounding repeatedly. Every noise was like a knife piercing my heart. I looked at David, I looked at Ethan, and then at the closed emergency room door. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to do anything to know how Sarah was. But I could only stay there, powerless, waiting. Almost 3 hours passed, long as a century. Finally, the emergency room door opened. An older man with a serious face came out. He introduced himself as Dr. Miller, the hospital director. His voice was deep and slow, as if he weighed every word. The patient suffered a traumatic brain injury and has fallen into a deep coma. We did everything possible, but the moment she wakes up depends on the patient's will. Those words were a blow to the chest. Deep coma, patient's will. Those phrases resonated in my mind, but I couldn't understand them. Sarah, the woman always radiant, full of life, now lay motionless between life and death. David collapsed. If I hadn't held him, he would have fallen to the floor. His eyes clouded over as if his whole world had crumbled. Ethan, frightened, nestled into my arms, his small body trembling. I held him tight, trying to hide my pain, but my tears were already flowing, silent, impossible to contain. I didn't want Ethan to see his grandmother cry, but how could I be strong when my family was falling apart? A young nurse with a badge that read, Jenny, approached with a chart. In a soft voice, she said, "The family can see the patient through the glass, but please, be quiet." I nodded. I led Ethan and David to the thick pane of glass. Through it, I saw Sarah motionless among a tangle of wires, her face pale, lifeless, her lips, which always smiled, now closed, as if she had gone far away, to a place where we couldn't reach her. David leaned his forehead against the glass and cried out desperately, "Honey, open your eyes and look at me." His heartbreaking voice echoed, breaking the stillness of the hallway. The nurses hurried to calm him gently, but I knew nothing could alleviate my son's pain at that moment. I stayed there, hugging Ethan, feeling every weak beat of his small heart. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but my throat closed up, unable to utter a single word. That night, I practically had to drag Ethan back home. The boy was inconsolable. He wanted to stay with his mother, but I couldn't leave him in the suffocating atmosphere of the hospital. I comforted him. I promised we would return the next day, though I didn't know myself what awaited us. David insisted on staying, curled up in a plastic chair in the hallway, his gaze fixed on the door of the room. I looked at my son, and my heart broke, but I knew I couldn't stay. Ethan needed me. The bakery needed me, and this entire family depended on me to stay on its feet. Tell me whether you have parents, grandparents, or older family members who deserve more respect than they currently receive from their families. Alternatively, tell me if you yourself are going through a situation in which you're not appreciated as much as you truly deserve. The days after that fateful moment, my small house seemed covered by a heavy, dark mist. Every morning when I woke up, I felt as if a rock had settled on my chest, making every breath difficult. I have lived 62 years. I have witnessed separations and deaths, but I had never felt as helpless as I did now. Sarah was still there, in the hospital, motionless, like a statue. And David, the son I was so proud of for his strength, was now just a shadow, turning City Central Hospital into his second home. Every day I saw David sitting in front of Sarah's room, immobile like a stone figure. His eyes were red, without their former sparkle. During the day, he stayed there, staring intently at the emergency room door, as if by just watching long enough, Sarah would open her eyes, walk out, and smile at him as before. But at night, when darkness fell, David sought the solace of alcohol. More than once, I found him sitting alone on a hospital bench, a bottle in his hand, his gaze lost like a troubled soul. Once, I arrived earlier than usual and found him passed out in the hallway, next to an empty bottle of cheap whiskey rolling on the floor. A young nurse, maybe Jenny, approached cautiously and told me in a low voice, "Ma'am, he shouldn't drink so much. It's not good for him." I could only nod, suppressing a sigh, although inside I felt something suffocating me. I did everything possible to pull David out of that abyss. Every morning I got up at 3, turned on the small kitchen, and prepared freshly baked bread, the kind he loved so much. I wrapped it carefully and took it to the hospital, hoping that familiar aroma would awaken something in him. But it was always the same. He barely took a couple of bites and left everything again, his gaze fixed on the door of room 4. "Mom, I'm not hungry," he mumbled in a hoarse voice, as if he had no emotion left. I looked at him and felt I was breaking inside. I wanted to scream at him, shake him, tell him he had to live, be strong for Ethan, for himself. But I could only silently gather the dishes, taking them back with a heavy heart. The burden of the whole family now rested on my aging shoulders. I was no longer young. Every morning when I got up, I felt every joint aching, every muscle tired. But I couldn't stop. The small bakery was our only source of income, and I had to keep it going. At 3 in the morning, when the whole city slept, I was already kneading dough and lighting the oven. The smell of hot bread used to bring me joy, but now it only reminded me of the peaceful days we had lost. During the day, I tended the shop while constantly checking the clock to then rush to pick up Ethan. There were days when the clientele was so large I could barely breathe. But I still had to grit my teeth and smile at every person, even though all I wanted inside was to collapse. Ethan, my little grandson, also changed completely. He used to be the sunshine of the house, with his radiant smile and endless stories. But now he has become quiet, reserved. Every afternoon leaving school, I see him sitting silently in a corner of the playground, clutching his superhero backpack tightly, his gaze lost. Once, the teacher took me aside, his voice full of concern. "Mrs. Johnson, Ethan has been very withdrawn lately. He doesn't play with the others. He just sits alone. Is there a problem at home?" I could only smile forcedly and answer superficially, "He's just a little tired. Don't worry." But inside, I knew well that Ethan was carrying a wound too big for his small heart. I wanted to hug him, tell him everything would be all right. But how could I promise something I didn't believe myself? Every afternoon, I took Ethan to the hospital to visit his mother. It was part of the routine, part of that fragile hope that Sarah would wake up. But the scene at the hospital never changed. David was still there, his beard neglected, strongly smelling of alcohol. I tried to make sure Ethan wouldn't notice, but the boy was more sensitive than I thought. He silently took the drawings he made in class, taped them against the cold glass, and whispered to his mother, "Mom, today I drew the whole family at the beach. There's you, Dad, Grandma, and me. Wake up soon so we can go, okay?" His voice trembled, as if trying to hold on to a dream that was slipping through his hands. I stood beside him, listening to every word with a broken heart. Sarah remained there, motionless, showing no signs of response. David usually took his son in his arms and, with a choked voice, told him, "Your mom hears you, son. She'll get better soon." But it was he who ended up crying, and Ethan, seeing him, would also burst into tears. I had to rush to comfort him and take him out of the room, even though I was also falling apart inside. My family's private life, which was once a source of pride, had now become a subject of gossip among the neighbors. One day, while standing in line at the supermarket, Mrs. Rodriguez, an acquaintance of many years, took me aside and asked me in a curious tone, "I don't see David and his wife together anymore. What happened? Is Sarah okay?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to keep my voice calm. "Sarah had an accident. She's in the hospital." But Rosa's inquisitive look and the murmurs of those nearby made me want to disappear. I hugged my basket and practically ran out, but the comments followed behind me like needles piercing my pride. I didn't want my family to be a topic of conversation, but I knew that in a small neighborhood like this, nothing could be hidden forever. That night, David stumbled back home, reeking of alcohol. He looked at me with red eyes and yelled, "Don't tell anyone about Sarah! I don't need their pity." His voice was harsh, but I knew that behind that fury was a pain impossible to put into words. I just nodded silently, suppressing a sigh, and let him stagger up to his room. Ethan was on the stairs, his childish gaze following his father's wavering silhouette. He didn't say anything. He just went to his room with his head down, clutching his superhero pillow tightly. Seeing him like that, I wanted to run and hug him, but I knew nothing could alleviate his pain at that moment. That night, I stayed alone in the cold kitchen, facing a mountain of bills that kept growing. Sarah's hospital expenses, Ethan's school, the bakery's upkeep. Every figure was like a cut to the soul. I had worked all my life with sweat to build a stable life for my family, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. That afternoon, the sun in Chicago was still relentless. I had just finished cleaning the bakery. I locked the door, helped Ethan into the car, and prepared for the daily hospital visit. The boy was in the back seat, quiet, tightly clutching his superhero backpack, as if it were the last comfort he had left. I wanted to say something to break the silence, but my throat closed up. I could only sigh and step on the accelerator. Arriving at City Central Hospital, the familiar and painful scene appeared before my eyes. The hallway was still cold. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose, and the announcements on the speakers sounded dry, one after another. David was sitting in the plastic chairs, his head drooping, nodding off from sheer exhaustion. At his feet, an empty beer can rolled, shining under the fluorescent light. Seeing my son like this squeezed my heart. David was once a man full of life, always laughing and talking loudly. But now he was just a shadow, consumed by pain and alcohol. I signaled to Ethan to be quiet. I didn't want to wake his father. The boy nodded, his eyes round, full of worry, and followed me slowly. The two of us approached the thick glass of the room. Sarah was there, still, as if plunged into a deep sleep. The beeping of the machines sounded steady, a cruel reminder that she was still alive but hanging by a thread. Her face was pale, without a trace of life, her lips closed as if guarding a secret. I looked at her with a heart shattered into pieces. How many times had I stood in that same spot, waiting for a miracle, hoping she would open her eyes, smile, and say it had all been just a nightmare. But it was always the same, silence. And each time, my heart broke a little more. I was about to take Ethan's hand and lead him away to escape that suffocating atmosphere when suddenly he tugged at my clothes, stood on tiptoes, approached my ear, and whispered softly, but with a force that went right through my soul. "Grandma, I think Mom isn't sick. She's faking." I felt a dry blow, as if someone had slapped me. I turned, looked directly into Ethan's transparent eyes, and tried to speak calmly, even though everything inside me was shaking. "Ethan, don't say silly things. Your mom is very sick. You know that." But the boy didn't argue as he usually did. He lowered his head, his hands trembling as he turned on the old cell phone David had given him to watch cartoons. "Look at this, Grandma," he said in a voice so low I had to strain to hear him. The screen flickered, and the image of Sarah's room appeared. In the video, there was no one else, just her lying on the bed, surrounded by wires and tubes. But then the unthinkable happened. Sarah slowly opened her eyes, looked around as if checking that no one was there, and then casually scratched her cheek. A moment later, she even sat up slightly. She took the glass of water from the table, took a sip, and lay back down, closing her eyes to remain motionless, as if nothing had happened. I stared at the screen, my head spinning, as if the whole world had been turned upside down. That wasn't a woman in a coma. That was a sham. I slumped into the chair, my hands weak, almost dropping the cell phone. Ethan was beside me, his voice trembling, as if scared by what he himself had discovered. "I've seen it several times, Grandma. Every time no one is here, Mom opens her eyes and looks around. But when you or Dad are here, she stays still. I don't know what she's doing. That's why I secretly recorded it so you could see." Hearing him, a shiver ran down my spine. Ethan's innocent whisper, that short video, was like a lightning bolt shattering the fog inside me. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, whom I always loved like a daughter, was faking it. But why? For what purpose? I hurriedly put the phone in my purse, trying to keep my voice as stern as possible. "Ethan, you absolutely cannot tell your dad about this. Do you understand?" The boy nodded, his eyes shining with fear and confusion. I knew he didn't fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the gravity. I hugged him, trying to hide the storm roaring inside me. But just then, David stirred and woke up. He rubbed his eyes, looking at us with a hoarse voice. "What are you two talking about?" I started. I shook my head and diverted the topic. "Nothing. Just reminding Ethan to do his homework at home." David nodded, then pulled his son toward him and whispered, "Don't worry, buddy. Mom will wake up soon." Ethan lowered his head, avoiding his father's gaze. Seeing him like that, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. He was too small to carry this weight, to keep a secret against his own father. On the way home, I rode the motorcycle as if floating, not feeling my feet touch the ground. My mind was chaos. The images from the video repeated over and over like a never-ending horror movie. Ethan's whisper, his terrified look, and Sarah's immobile face. Everything was a puzzle that didn't fit. I wondered, am I misinterpreting this? Is it just an involuntary moment, a body reaction? But deep down, I knew that what I saw was no coincidence. Sarah was hiding something, and that filled me with fear. Not fear for her, but for David, for Ethan, for my whole family. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. When the first light of day had not yet filtered through the crack in the door, I arrived at City Central Hospital earlier than normal, when the hallways were still empty, and only a few on-duty staff passed silently. David hadn't arrived yet. Perhaps he had gone home to clean up after an entire night by his wife's side. I stood in the corner of the hallway, looking through the window into Sarah's room. She was still there, motionless, her face pale as wax. But now, every time I looked at her, I no longer saw the fragility of someone fighting between life and death. Instead, I only saw a veil of mystery hiding something I couldn't yet decipher. Jenny, the young nurse assigned exclusively to Sarah's care, was in the room. She was cleaning my daughter-in-law's body with gentle but somewhat mechanical movements. I hid behind the corner of the hallway, observing her every gesture. Jenny worked, but her eyes constantly darted outward, as if afraid of being discovered. Occasionally, she murmured something so low that I couldn't understand, but enough to transmit uneasiness. Something was not right. I knew it for sure. My heart was a tangle of anger and fear, but I told myself I had to stay calm. If I wanted to uncover the truth, I couldn't let emotions dominate me. When Jenny came out of room 4, carrying the control chart, I inhaled deeply and moved forward. She was bent over, writing, without noticing my presence. I tried to keep my voice steady, although my heart hammered in my chest. "Good morning, Jenny. Tell me, in the moments when you care for Sarah, have you ever noticed anything out of the ordinary? For example, her waking up in secret when no one is around." I spoke each word carefully, closely observing her reaction. Jenny jumped, as if I had thrown a bomb directly at her chest. Her eyes widened in terror, and the pen she was holding fell to the floor with a dry clatter. That sound echoed in the silent hallway, confirming that I had hit exactly where her deepest fear lay. "Ma'am, what are you saying? I don't understand," Jenny stammered, avoiding my gaze, unable to sustain it. She backed up a step, clutching the control chart as if trying to hold on to it. I moved closer, my voice firm, without a trace of softness. "That reaction means it's true, doesn't it?" I looked directly into her eyes, searching for a crack in her panic. Jenny's face was pale. Her lips trembled as if she were about to cry. She slumped into the chair, speaking in a thin, almost whispered voice. I was only following orders from Dr. Miller. He asked me to keep the secret. Please, I'm just an employee. Don't drag me into this." That half-confession hit me like a lightning bolt. I stood still, feeling the ground opening up beneath my feet. It was true. Sarah was not only faking the coma, but Dr. Miller, the hospital director, was also involved. I tried to keep the calm in my voice, although I was boiling with rage inside. "What exactly did he ask you? Say it clearly, Jenny." I advanced another step, giving her no room to escape. Jenny shook her head hard, wringing her hands, speaking in gasps. "He just ordered me to take good care of Mrs. Sarah. Not to tell anyone that she had already woken up. I have nothing to do with anything else. I beg you, don't blame me." She looked up, her eyes red, as if pleading for forgiveness. But I couldn't give in. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed the truth. I needed to protect my son and my grandson from whatever was happening. At that moment, another nurse passed down the hallway, giving us a curious look. Jenny abruptly stood up, picked up the pen, and pretended to resume her notes as if nothing had happened. I turned around in silence, my heart pounding like a drum. Every step as I left the hallway weighed on me as if I were carrying a rock. What Jenny had admitted not only confirmed my suspicions, but revealed something worse. This wasn't just a hoax by Sarah, but a deception backed by someone in power like Dr. Miller. What were they plotting? How could they be so cruel as to deceive an entire family, letting David and Ethan sink into grief? When David arrived at the hospital, I tried to remain serene, as if nothing had happened. He asked me in a tired voice, "Mom, how is Sarah? Is there any news?" I just shook my head and replied in a low voice, "She's the same," the doctor said. "He says there are no advances." But inside, fire consumed me. I wanted to tell David everything, show him Ethan's video, tell him his wife wasn't in a coma, but seeing his red eyes, his exhausted face, I couldn't. David had already lost too much, and I feared that this truth would be the final straw that destroyed him completely. That night, I stayed up turning in my old bed. The faint moonlight filtered through the curtains and illuminated the ceiling, but it couldn't dispel the darkness surrounding my mind. I gripped the blanket tightly, trying to force myself to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, sharp questions pierced my heart. Why did Sarah do that? What role did Dr. Miller play in all of this? And the most terrible part, had all those years I loved and trusted my daughter-in-law been just a sham? I felt betrayed not only by Sarah, but also by my own naivety. I realized that I couldn't solve this alone. I needed help. The next morning, I woke up early and took Ethan to school, as usual. The boy was still silent, hugging his Spider-Man backpack with a lost look, as if trapped in a world he didn't understand. I stroked his head and tried to smile. "Work hard in school today. I'll pick you up early." Ethan nodded, but I knew he didn't believe my words of comfort. Seeing his small back disappear behind the school gate, I felt my heart clench. I had to uncover the truth, not just for me, but for Ethan, so he wouldn't continue living in this gloom. I drove straight to the office of Mr. Santiago, a private detective who had been a friend of my late husband. He was an ex-cop whom my husband always respected for his dedication and keen insight. Santiago's office was on a neglected corner with a worn wooden sign. Upon entering, I saw him sitting behind a desk full of scratches, his penetrating eyes looking at me over silver-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Johnson, it's been a long time. What's wrong? You look so tense," he asked in a grave but attentive voice. I took a deep breath and told him everything. From Ethan's innocent whisper and the unexpected video to the confrontation with the nurse, Jenny. I tried to remain calm, but my hands trembled as I showed him the video on the phone. Santiago watched it repeatedly, frowning. His fingers gently tapped the table, as he always did. "This isn't just anything, Mrs. Johnson," he said in a low voice. "If what you say is true, there's a conspiracy going on. I will help you. But you have to keep this a secret, especially from your son." I nodded, feeling relieved to share the burden, but also heavier, seeing how the truth was beginning to come to light. Santiago promised to start watching the hospital immediately, and I left his office with a fragile spark of hope mixed with fear. That night, I took Ethan back to the hospital. The air was just as suffocating as ever. The smell of disinfectant hit me, and the constant sounds of the machines came from Sarah's room. David was already there, sitting next to his wife's bed, holding her hand tightly while tears silently rolled down his cheeks. Seeing him like that, pain pierced me. David, my strong son, the pride of my life, now looked like an empty man. I wanted to hug him, tell him all the truth, but every time I encountered his red eyes, I didn't dare. How could I tell him that the woman he loved might be deceiving him? How could I shatter his heart even more? I made an excuse to go to the hallway for water, leaving Ethan next to his father. Passing a corner near the nurse's station, I managed to see Jenny talking to a security guard. She slipped a thin folder into his hand, her gaze nervous, as if afraid of being discovered. I held my breath and slowed my pace to listen better. "Give this to him quickly," Jenny murmured in a trembling voice. The guard nodded. He put the folder in his jacket pocket and hurried towards Dr. Miller's office. When Jenny came back, her eyes met mine. She started. She quickly lowered her head, pretending not to see me, and hurried away. I moved forward, intending to call her, but the guard was already looking at me with eyes full of distrust. I stopped, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. A few days later, Santiago called me to a small cafe hidden in a deserted alley. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a secluded corner with a stack of photos in front of him. "Sit down," he said in a grave but tense voice. He pushed the photos toward me, and looking at them, I felt my whole body go numb. They were photos taken secretly, showing Sarah in a patient gown with a white robe over it, stealthily leaving the room in the middle of the night. She walked with quiet but conscious steps, without any sign of being in a coma. Sarah went directly to Dr. Miller's office. The door closed sharply behind her. The light was still on inside, even though it was past midnight. I took the photos with trembling hands, feeling the blood drain from me. This is real," I whispered, my voice breaking. Santiago nodded, his gaze serious. "His office is very well soundproofed. I couldn't hear anything, but it's obvious something strange is going on. I've been watching her for several nights, and it's not the only time she's done this. I'm going to keep investigating, but you have to be prepared. This could be bigger than we think." I nodded, though my mind was blank. Jenny's words echoed in my ears. "I'm only following orders from Miller." The pieces were starting to fit, forming a terrifying picture I didn't want to believe. Arriving home, I sat in the dark kitchen, the faint light falling on my trembling hands. Ethan was already asleep, but I knew he was still carrying the fear regarding his mother. David was at the hospital, watching over a wife who might be deceiving him. I took out my phone, looked at Ethan's video again, and thought about Santiago's photos. Every detail was like a stab, but I knew I couldn't stop. I decided that in addition to trusting Santiago, I myself had to look for more evidence. I couldn't allow my family to continue living a lie. I had to protect David, protect Ethan, even if the price was my own shattered heart. That morning, I woke up before dawn. I couldn't sleep, not from fatigue, but because doubt and pain devoured me all night. I looked at the clock. It was barely 4. David, my son, was probably still sleeping soundly after a night of drinking. It was my chance to do what I had postponed for too long. I went up the stairs in silence, barefoot to not make noise. The house was eerily quiet. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. I stood in front of David and Sarah's room door. I gripped the doorknob tightly, feeling my heart pound furiously in my chest. I knew I shouldn't do it, that I shouldn't snoop in my son and daughter-in-law's room. But I no longer had another option. If Sarah was really betraying us, I needed evidence, something to protect my family. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room was still permeated with Sarah's sweet, penetrating perfume, a fragrance that once seemed tender and familiar. On the dressing table, a red lipstick lay open as if she had left just minutes before. Those small details pierced my soul. I remembered when Sarah first got married, how carefully she did her hair, how she smiled, trying on a new dress. Had it all been a sham? I shook my head, pushing away those memories, and began to search. I opened each drawer carefully so as not to disturb anything. Every small noise, even the slight rustle of fabric, made me jump, fearing David would wake up and discover me. I checked the dressing table, the bookshelves, even under the bed, but found nothing apart from the usual objects. Finally, I opened the old closet where Sarah used to keep her things. In the last drawer, hidden under several layers of silk scarves, I found a package of blue folders tied with a rubber band. My hands trembled as I opened it, as if I were about to touch a horrifying secret. Inside were 2 life insurance policies. The documents Joinfeedly printed, Sarah's signature clear at the bottom of each page. The first was a health insurance with a clause that would pay a huge sum if the patient required prolonged treatment or fell into a coma. The amount stunned me, enough to buy a big house. The second policy was even more terrifying. A temporary life insurance with an indemnity several times higher, enough to completely change a life. I read them over and over, trying to understand why Sarah, a woman without stable employment, had signed such large contracts. She used to ask David for money to shop, and sometimes even asked me, with some embarrassment, to cover basic expenses. So where did the money to pay for those policies come from, and why did she need them? I took out my phone and photographed every page, careful not to wrinkle the paper each time I pressed the button. I felt like I was betraying my own family, but I knew I had no other choice. I put the folders back in their place, closed the drawer, and left the room. But just as I opened the door, I ran into David. He was standing there, a suspicious look on his face. His hair was messy, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing in my room, Mom?" I started. I hid the phone behind my back, my heart pounding hard. "Oh, I was just looking for the old photo album," I replied awkwardly, forcing a smile. David sighed. He didn't ask any more questions and staggered toward the kitchen, where I knew he would look for the liquor bottle again. Looking at my son's back, I felt my heart clench. I wanted it to tell him everything, show him those documents. But I knew David wasn't ready to face the truth yet. In the afternoon, I met Santiago at the small cafe where we had arranged to meet before. He had new information. When I sat down, he pushed another stack of photos toward me, this time taken in the hospital's empty parking lot. The images showed Sarah and Dr. Miller inside a car, sharing intimate gestures impossible to deny. Sarah, dressed in patient clothes, smiled at Miller, her hand on his. Her gaze full of intent, I stood motionless, stirring the already cold coffee with a trembling hand. "This is real, Santiago," I whispered, my voice breaking. He nodded, his voice grave. "I've been following them for several nights. It's not the first time. Something very murky is going on here, Mrs. Johnson. You must be prepared. This might be bigger than we think." I nodded, although my mind was blank. Jenny's words resonated in my ears. "I'm only following orders from Miller." The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a terrifying picture I didn't want to believe. That midday, the heat of Chicago was suffocating, and the air inside my small bakery felt so dense I could barely breathe. I had just finished cleaning the counter, sweat beading on my forehead and trying to concentrate on organizing the place to forget the doubts that gnawed at me inside. In those days, every minute felt like a battle, maintaining the bakery, taking care of Ethan, and facing the terrifying truth about Sarah. I had just arranged the remaining loaves in a basket, ready to close and go rest. When some thunderous knocks rattled the alley door, the noise was so loud that I jumped and almost dropped the tray from my hands. I rushed to open it with a premonition in my chest. When the door opened, I froze. 3 men blocked the entrance, their faces stern and tattoos of snakes and dragons running down their arms. The one who seemed to be the boss, tall with a shaved head, held out a crumpled paper and spoke in a harsh voice. "Where is Sarah? It's time to pay the debt." I looked at the paper. My heart was pounding wildly, as if the blood were escaping my body. I tried to remain calm, though my hands were already trembling. "You're mistaken. My daughter-in-law is in a coma in the hospital. She can't see anyone." The man let out a dry laugh, a sound so cruel that a shiver ran through me. "Coma? Do you think we're idiots? Sarah asked us for a huge sum to invest in a business. If she plays dumb, this family won't have any peace." His words cut through me like a knife. I looked around and saw some neighbors peering from their doors, with looks mixed with curiosity and fear. I knew that if this escalated, the whole neighborhood would talk, and my family would be the target of whispers. I swallowed and replied in a controlled voice, "Please calm down. I don't know anything about those debts. Let me find out." But the boss was not willing to budge. He smiled sideways and pointed at my small house. "Find out. You have 1 week. If there's no money, sell the house and pay." I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. I wanted to protest, to scream that I had nothing to do with it, that Sarah was still in the hospital, but the cold stares of the 3 men made it clear that they weren't playing. I hurried inside. I opened the safe hidden in the kitchen and took out all the savings I had guarded for years for Ethan and the bakery. I put them in the boss's hand, my voice trembling. "Take this for now. I beg you to give me more time." They looked at me with contempt, as if deciding whether to ruin everything right there. Finally, the boss pocketed the money and issued a final threat. "Send it. 1 week. Don't force us to come back." Then the 3 of them left. Their heavy footsteps disappeared into the alley. I collapsed onto the step, drenched in sweat, not from the heat, but from the fear and helplessness that was strangling me. Sarah in debt, investing in businesses. Those words echoed in my head, but they didn't make sense. How could she, whom I always thought was so simple, be involved in something like this? Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Santiago. I opened it with still trembling hands and felt my heart stop when I saw what he had swooned. They were photos of Sarah and Dr. Miller inside a car parked at the hospital. They were embracing without shame, and Sarah's eyes looked at him with a tenderness that seemed to erase the entire world. Next to the photos was a short audio with a note from Santiago. I recorded their conversation inside the car with a special device. You should listen. I turned on the recording. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. Sarah's voice sounded harsh, but clear enough for me to hear every word. Let me sleep a few more weeks, and then we'll move on to the last step. That insurance money will solve all the debts and give us a new life. Miller's voice responded, grave and calculating. Calm down, Sarah. Everything is going well. As long as no one suspects, we will succeed. I turned off the recording, feeling all the strength drain from my body. Everything exploded in my head. Sarah wasn't just faking a coma. She wasn't just having a relationship with Dr. Miller. She had orchestrated a sham to escape debts and seize the insurance money. She planned to leave everything behind, David, Ethan, and me, to start a new life with her accomplice. That afternoon, I sat in front of a cup of cold coffee, clasping my hands as if I could still hold on to a bit of courage. I knew that if I wanted to protect my family, I couldn't remain silent. David, my son, had to know the truth, even if it shattered him. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked toward the living room where David was sitting. His gaze was lost in the void. I placed all the evidence on the table, the photos of Sarah and Miller in the car, the copy of the insurance contract, and the phone with the recording. David looked up with clouded eyes, not understanding what I was doing. Mom, what is this? He asked in a hoarse voice, still smelling of last night's alcohol. I sat across from him, trying to stay firm, though my heart was pounding hard. David, I need you to look at this. I know you don't want to believe it, but you have to face the truth. I pointed to the stack of photos, my voice cracking. Sarah is not in a coma. She is deceiving us. David shook his head repeatedly, his hands trembling, brushing against the photos, until suddenly he threw them to the floor and yelled, It can't be! Where did you get this? It's all fabricated. Sarah would never betray me. His red eyes seemed to cling desperately to a crumbling faith. I took his trembling hand, speaking as softly as I could. David, you need to wake up. Look at reality. Sarah not only deceived you, she also manipulated Ethan's innocence. I know it hurts, but you can't keep living a lie. Play the recording. Sarah's voice sounded again, clear and cold. Let me sleep a few more weeks, and then we'll move on to the last step. That insurance money will solve all the debts and give us a new life. David froze, as if someone had sapped him. He listened to the entire audio, and then suddenly burst into tears, tears of pain and collapse. Why, Mom? Why did she do this to me? Why to Ethan? He whispered with a broken voice. I hugged him, feeling his body tremble in my arms, not knowing how to comfort him. I could only say, I'm sorry, David. I'm hurting too, but we have to be strong, for Ethan. David rose unsteadily, went to the liquor cabinet, filled a shot glass of whiskey, and drank it in one gulp. Then he went into his room and slammed the door shut. That impact echoed like a hammer blow in my chest. I knew my son needed time, but I also knew I couldn't wait any longer. The truth was naked, and if Sarah and Miller were about to take the final step of their plan, I had to act before it was too late. I arranged to meet Santiago the next morning in a secluded corner of our usual cafe. He was there with a cup of black coffee in front of him, his face full of tension. "Did you tell David yet?" he asked as soon as I sat down. I nodded, my voice grave. He doesn't want to believe it, but a mother can't let her son remain deceived. "What do we do now, Santiago?" He gently tapped the table with his fingers, his gaze sharp. "We have enough evidence to go to the police, the recording, the photos, the insurance contract. But if you want David to see the truth with his own eyes, we need a final blow at the hospital. We have to make Sarah and Miller expose themselves." I nodded, feeling both determination and fear. I knew David needed to see it for himself. Otherwise, he would always live in the illusion of the wife he once loved. The next day, I looked for little Rosario, an old college friend who was now the police chief of the area. We shared our youth, and I knew she was someone I could trust. In her small office, I told her everything, from Ethan's video to Santiago's evidence. Rosario listened, her face growing more serious. When I showed her the recording, she shook her head, her voice grave. "This is an organized scam, Mrs. Johnson. If what you say is true, Sarah and Miller have not only violated ethics but the law. I will help you. But we need a valid pretext to break in without raising suspicion. Do you have a plan?" I didn't have time to answer when my phone vibrated in my purse. It was Dr. Miller's number. I answered, my heart pounding. His voice on the other end sounded heavy, with a false tone of compassion. "Mrs. Johnson, I am very sorry to inform you that Sarah's situation is worsening. Perhaps the family should prepare. Tomorrow morning, please be present. We will give the final prognosis." I felt a shiver, as if I had touched a block of ice. There it was. That was the moment they planned to drop the curtain on their sham. I tried to sound calm as I replied, "Yes, doctor, we will be there tomorrow." Hanging up, I turned to Rosario, my voice trembling. "Tomorrow, in Sarah's room. That is the moment." Rosario nodded with a firm look. "Agreed. I will prepare the team. We will act at the precise moment." I felt a spark of hope, but at the same time, fear grew. What would happen when David faced the truth? Would he withstand the blow? And Ethan, my dear grandson, how would he react to knowing his mother had deceived the whole family? That night, I took Ethan to Mrs. Lucia's house, the trusted neighbor who lived across the street. I didn't want the boy to witness the terrible scene that was coming. When I told him he would be sleeping at Mrs. Lucia's house that night, Ethan looked at me with worry in his eyes. "Grandma, is Mom okay? You'll take me to see her tomorrow, right?" I hugged him, holding back tears. "It's all right, honey. I'll pick you up early tomorrow." But when the boy turned away, I felt my heart break. How could I protect him from such a cruel truth? Returning home, I found David sitting in the dark, a liquor bottle rolling at his feet. He didn't say anything. He was just there, his eyes red and empty. I approached, placed my hand on his shoulder, and said a single phrase. "You have to go to the hospital tomorrow. You need to know the definitive truth." David looked up, his face marked by pain, but nodded in silence. I knew he also felt that everything was about to change forever. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was as heavy as lead. I woke up early, but not out of the habit of baking bread, but from the feeling of unease that pressed against my chest. Today was the day everything would come to light, and although I had prepared myself, my heart was still trembling. David was sitting at the table without a word. His face was haggard and exhausted after so many days, lost between alcohol and pain. I looked at my son. I wanted to tell him something to comfort him, but my throat closed up. "Let's go, David," was all I could say in a hoarse voice. He nodded, stood up, and together we got into the car, driving in silence toward City Central Hospital. Throughout the drive, David stared out the window with a lost look, as if his soul had abandoned his body long ago. When we arrived at the hospital, the familiar hallway appeared with the strong smell of disinfectant and the constant noise of the machines. Jenny was there with a few other nurses. Her face was nervous, restless, as if she knew something was about to happen. I glanced at her but said nothing. I just squeezed David's hand to give him courage. Dr. Miller came out of his office with a file in hand. He greeted us with a feigned formality and said in a grave, solemn voice, "Mrs. Johnson, Mir David, please come in." I nodded. Though rage boiled inside me, I knew that just outside, Rosario and her team of officers were already ready. We entered Sarah's room, where some family members had already gathered. The air was heavy, as if everyone felt the tension. Sarah lay motionless and her face pale, but I no longer saw her as a victim. I only saw a woman who had orchestrated a cruel play, deceiving my entire family. Miller, standing next to the bed, began his speech in a mournful voice. "After many days of effort, we regret to inform you that the patient's condition is worsening more and more. We fear she may not survive. The family should be prepared." David lowered his head. His shoulders trembled. Some relatives began to sob, and the moans spread, creating a scene of mourning as false as it was calculated. I stood, my fists clenched, holding back the fury that burned in my chest. I looked at Miller and his perfect performance, and I knew it was a matter of seconds until his theater came to an end. But what they didn't imagine was that today, Rosario and I would be the ones to drop the curtain. Just as Miller raised his pen to sign the fatal prognosis certificate, the door burst open. 3 uniformed police officers entered, led by Rosario, whose gaze was cold and decisive. The room fell into absolute silence. Rosario declared firmly, "Dr. Miller, Mrs. Sarah Thompson, you are under arrest for fraud and insurance scam." Her voice resonated loudly, relentless, like a hammer blow that shattered the entire farce. And then, something incredible happened. Sarah, who was supposedly in a deep coma, suddenly opened her eyes, sat up in bed, and screamed. "What are you saying? You have no proof. This is slander." Her shrill, desperate voice had nothing to do with someone who had been immobile for weeks. David was paralyzed, his mouth open, watching his dying wife scream like a wild animal. Sarah turned toward him, and a flash of panic appeared in her eyes, as if she had realized she had just given herself away. She quickly turned her face, unable to meet her husband's gaze. Rosario signaled, and an officer stepped forward, presenting all the evidence. The photos of Sarah and Miller in the car, the recording of their conversation, the images of the insurance contract, and the statement of the nurse, Jenny. I took out my cell phone and showed the video Ethan had recorded, where Sarah was seen opening her eyes secretly, drinking water, and getting up when no one was watching her. Murmurs and comments began to fill the room. A relative mumbled, "My God, how can this be possible?" Another exclaimed, "She deceived our entire family." The atmosphere in the room turned chaotic, as if the truth had just shattered all illusions. David trembled, his gaze fixed on Sarah. Then, as if waking from a dream, he shouted with a broken voice, "Sarah, why did you do this to me? Why to Ethan?" Sarah lunged toward him, trying to hug him, crying and pleading. "David, you have to understand. I had no choice. I owed too much. I just wanted us to have a better life." But David abruptly pushed her hands away. His eyes now only reflected rage and repulsion. "Better? You abandoned our son. You abandoned this family just for money." His voice trembled as if every word were a dagger plunging into his own chest. Miller stood there, his head bowed, unable to offer more excuses. While the recording in the car played, his voice echoed, cold and calculating. "Calm down, Sarah. As long as no one suspects, we will succeed." The entire room fell silent. Only the hospital speaker could be heard in the distance. Rosario signaled, and the officers placed the cold silver handcuffs on both of their wrists. Sarah still struggled, screaming desperately, "I did everything because of the debts. I had no way out." But no one believed her anymore. Not even the relatives who had been crying for her earlier. Now they only looked at her with estranged eyes. David collapsed into the chair, his hands on his head, as if unable to bear the weight of the truth. I approached, placed my hand on my son's shoulder, and said softly, "This is the truth, son. I know it hurts, but we have to keep going." David didn't answer. He just sat there, tears falling silently. I felt his pain as if it were my own. I had lost a daughter-in-law I had loved, but David had lost a part of his life. The hospital room, once quiet, was now chaos. Sarah's screams grew weaker and more distant as she was escorted out in handcuffs. Miller walked behind her with his head down, no trace of the authority of a hospital director. When the door closed, restoring silence, I looked around the room at the stunned faces of the relatives and felt a great emptiness in my heart. The truth had come to light, but it brought no joy. It only left pain and emptiness. A few months passed since that day when the truth exploded in the hospital room, but every moment remains etched in my memory. The image of Sarah sitting up and screaming frantically, David's pained eyes, and the sound of the handcuffs closing on their wrists. Everything seemed like an unforgettable nightmare. But now, in front of the courtroom, I feel a slight relief, as if a weight is finally being lifted from my heart. Today is the day of the public trial for Sarah and Dr. Miller, and I know it will be the final punctuation mark to the cruel play that shattered my family. David and I sat in the front row of the packed courtroom. The atmosphere was suffocating, full of whispers from strangers, the press, and some neighbors. David was next to me, much thinner than before, but he no longer had the desperation that bottles brought him. There was a calm in his gaze, as if he had learned to live with the pain. I took his hand, squeezing it tightly to support him. He looked at me, smiled weakly, and I understood that although it still hurt, he was trying to move forward. The judge, a middle-aged man with a severe face, began to read the indictment. His voice was clear, every word like a hammer blow shattering the falsehood of the past months. Sarah and Miller were accused of multiple crimes: fraud, insurance scam, and conspiracy to appropriate assets. All the evidence was publicly displayed on the large screen in the courtroom. Ethan's video, Santiago's photos, the recording in the car, and the insurance contracts I found in the drawer. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece that exposed the elaborate plan by Sarah and Miller to deceive my entire family. Miller sat in the defendant's box, his head bowed, not daring to look up. He admitted his guilt in a grave voice, almost a whisper, acknowledging that he had helped Sarah out of ambition and their murky relationship. Sarah, on the other hand, still tried to resist. She cried, her hair tangled, her eyes red, looking toward David. "David, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be like this. I just wanted to pay the debts. I wanted a better life for us." But those late tears no longer moved anyone. David looked at her coldly, without a drop of compassion. Better? You betrayed this family. You betrayed Ethan just for money, he said, his voice trembling with rage and pain. The final sentence was dictated. Miller received 6 years in prison, Sarah 5 years, in addition to the obligation to compensate for all damages. When the judge struck the gavel, the dry sound marked the end of everything. Sarah collapsed, crying inconsolably, but no one in the room wanted to look at her. Miller was escorted out with his head down, the figure of someone who once held power and was now just a shadow. David was next to me, his hands clasped, tears falling silently. I knew they weren't tears of suffering, but of liberation. My son was finally free from the illusion of a wife he once loved. When we left the courthouse, the radiant Chicago sun no longer burned as before. The press surrounded us, microphones in front of our faces, questions thrown nonstop. I only said one sentence, my voice calm but firm. Justice has been served. Never play with the feelings of family, because the price will be too high. David was beside me, saying nothing, but squeezing my hand tightly, as if to tell me he was ready to move forward now. Our life slowly returned to its course, although the scars remained. My small bakery was once again filled with customers. The smell of flour and yeast again brought that feeling of home. Every morning I woke up early, kneaded, baked the first batches of bread, and felt my heart lighter. Ethan started chatting again, helping me arrange the bread, running around the shop with his pure smile. He still mentioned his mother, but no longer with that lost sadness from before. His laughter, like sunlight, began to fill the painful gaps in our small house. David also changed. He got a new job at a mechanic's workshop where he could concentrate on concrete things instead of getting lost in alcohol. I watched him learn to be a real father, spending time playing with Ethan, taking him to school, and telling him stories every night. Some nights, I saw David sitting silently by the window, his gaze lost. But I knew he was learning to forgive himself, not Sarah, but himself. One afternoon, when the whole family was gathered around the table, Ethan suddenly lifted his head, his eyes wide, and looked at me. "Grandma, is Mom coming back someday?" The boy's question was like a stab, but I smiled. I took his small hand and replied tenderly, "Some people choose to leave, Ethan, but the important thing is that we still have each other, Grandma, Dad, and you. That is family." David looked at me. His eyes shone with determination, and then he stroked Ethan's head. "That's right, son. We will always be here for each other." Ethan nodded. An innocent smile appeared on his face, and for the first time in many months, I felt that this house was warm again, as it used to be. I stayed there looking at my son and grandson, my heart filled with peace. The worst storm had passed, leaving scars, but also giving us the strength to move forward. I thought about the days of suffering, the nights of insomnia, and all those times I thought I couldn't bear it anymore. But now I know that my family made it. We not only survived, but became stronger, more united. I got up. I poured another glass of orange juice for Ethan and smiled as I listened to him talk about the new drawing he had made in class. A drawing of Grandma, his dad, and him together under a bright sun. Seeing Ethan's smile and David's firm gaze, I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, we would continue forward together. My small house, once shattered by the storm, was now rebuilt, not with bricks, but with love and trust. And I, who had dedicated my entire life to protecting this family, finally found a little peace in my heart. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and pauses to reflect. How many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that illuminates the path of others. God always blesses. And I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I will leave two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am convinced they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses, and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.